Okay, good morning to the first session of day 3 of the Future Law Virtual Summit. And this morning we have a very special fireside chat with Professor Shruti Pandey. And Professor Shruti Pandey has been someone who has come into the work that we're doing during the COVID-19 crisis. Professor Shruti Pandey, who has an incredible trajectory, which I would love for her to share a little bit more on as we get into the conversation in the area, particularly of human rights, as a lawyer and as an academic, and also in the NGO and philanthropic sector. She's had all these different experiences feeding into who she is today. And Professor Shruti Pandey was one of the over 180 lawyers that responded to the call, how can we work together collaboratively during this multi-layered crisis to make sense of what was happening around the world and to begin the work of figuring out a new form of collaboration to respond to these challenges better at a more collective level. So really grateful and privileged to have met you, Shruti, and welcome today to this fireside chat.
Thank you again, Margaret, and the privilege is entirely mine. And I responded to the call because your call is powerful and it is timely, and all of us need to be part of such initiatives. This is like I say, this is the worst time and the best time to be. And I look at the first more than the second as what keeps me going on a day-to-day basis. I like this to be to look at this as a time when we can make a difference to our world. And thank you for the introduction. I think you made it look very very elegant. It hasn't been so. It has been more messy than elegant. My own journey. You put nice words to basically what I call as myself as a wandering lawyer, and I'm pretty lost. And as law gets more and more entrenched, I'm finding it hard to be able to make the meaning out of the conventional roles of lawyers. So that is my own journey, and currently I teach, and that's because I feel that the future is going to be important, and as teachers we can be multipliers of ideas, and I think this is the time to generate new ideas.
And you run the Human Rights Institute in the Jindal Law School, not so?
I have recently taken over. I'm a recent entrant to the academia itself. I started teaching in the Jindal Global Law School at the OP Jindal Global University in the National Capital Territory in India, only 2 years back. So before that, I had been mostly a practitioner, first in the courts and then outside the courts, trying to build bridges between law and social transformation, and trying to support programs and organizations doing that. And so I began teaching 2 years back, and this portfolio of the directorship of Human Rights Center has been entrusted to me only very recently during the pandemic. So I'm yet to take off, but yes, I am officially now leading the center.
Yeah, and you've done quite a bit of human rights work in your practice, and have been involved in some of the landmark cases in India. You're very, very humble. But I mean, I do want the listeners to understand that you're a wandering lawyer, and you say you're lost, but through your wandering and your search, you have been able to contribute and help alleviate some of the suffering of your clients at a very significant level in India. And so, I mean, I'm just excited to have this conversation with you, particularly because of the topic that we've chosen to have a discussion around this morning. And even before we get to that, I just want to get a little more personal with you, Shruti, so that the viewers and audience can understand who you are and what brings you to this work. So I would like to ask you, what do you think has compelled you throughout your career to keep going and keep doing the work that you've done, because you were doing, you know, significant human rights work, and then you started to look at building bridges, as you say, between law and social transformation. Now you're in academia and teaching and really trying to shape the minds of some of the students in India. What is driving you to keep on doing this work?
It's a question I ask myself every now and then, Margaret, and the answers are always same or similar. I think, you know, basically, I think all of us are blessed with one kind of or few kinds of intelligence. Some of us are musicians, and some of us are mathematicians, and some of us are technicians, and we're good with machines. I happen to have been blessed, I think, with the intelligence around justice. I think it is something that, you know, from the beginning, from very early childhood, I remember, you know, fighting for the underdog in, you know, bullies in the classroom or in the playground. And I think so it was very easy for me to associate with law, because law is the closest to justice. It's the closest tool to justice. And so for me, that choice was very natural. And I never had a doubt about the fact that this is what, this is who I am. It is, you know, it's the best way to work is when you don't see your work as work, but it is you. And that's how I have approached my work. So it's true that I've been wondering, but what is also true is that my conviction about about working on justice and human rights has never changed. My locations have and roles have changed, but so for me, when I joined as a law student, I was the only big moment of shifting was when I realized that law is not, it is not self-actualizing into justice. It doesn't equal to justice. In fact, to the contrary, that law is often pulled by the powerful to retain their power and privileges. And that was a shock, I must say. And then, so then the journey was not just to connect law with justice, but to connect just law, not just connect with not just connect with law and justice with people, but connect law and justice, you know, first. And I think that has been very fascinating journey for me, and which is why I have been moving, because as I've practiced in the Supreme Court of India, the politics of India was changing very, very drastically. This is the time when the mid 90s onwards, India had famously liberalized its economy, gotten rid of bureaucracy, but it was also just ushering in the unbridled market. And things changed drastically. I was a product of public institutions, born in a public hospital, schooled in a public school, went to a public college, and then suddenly everything was privatized. And the courts were mirroring that change, where the state was shrinking. And so as a human rights lawyer, the role of as the state began to shrink its responsibilities, the courts were less and less empowered, or less and less willing, both, because courts are also part of our society. And then, so at some point I felt that the answers did not lie in the court. And that's how I went outside to see what else could be done. What are the other strategies apart from just litigation and courtroom? And that's how I moved, just with my gut feeling and intuition. But yeah, believing that law is messy, but a critical tool for justice.
A critical tool for justice. And recently, you've turned to this issue, and you've been looking into this issue, and I think you have some deep insight to share on this issue of the global city dream. Could you share with us what you mean by the global city dream? What is this global city? Yeah.
Right. So this is actually my own. I'm very excited about it because I have learned this on the job. It is not something that is taught in law schools at all. It is also not something that the lawyers are really working on very strongly. Most of the people who are working on the global city are people from other disciplines. But law is a very important part of this change, and strangely, lawyers have not. There have been sociologists and urban planners and economists who have talked about law, policy, and global city, but somehow lawyers are not doing it, at least as far as I understand. And I think that and so for me, it began from some cases that I got in the early 2000s. This was 10 years after India had started liberalizing. They were massive demolition drives, eviction and demolition and eviction drives in what are called slums, derogatively, but which are basically this urban informal settlements, and the courts were shutting their doors on the evicted communities, despite there being a robust set of standards, international standards on how these demolitions and evictions and displacements can be carried out. And we had a very shocking judgment from the Supreme Court of India, where the Supreme Court said that resettling an evicted family from a settlement is like rewarding a pickpocket. And so then the Supreme Court went on to become what has been called by a legal scholar as the slum demolition machine. And so we had a lot of what came to be also called as court sanctioned evictions. So a lot of us as lawyers were working on the rights of the urban poor communities, especially the housing rights. But I realized that this is not, and then slowly as the word spread, the community stopped going to the courts because the courts were being very regressive, and it was dangerous to go to courts because the jurisprudence was more and more negative. And this is the time when we were otherwise advancing in our socioeconomic rights. And so there was this realization that is something that we are missing. And that's when I started looking at urbanization as the bigger canvas within which the urban housing is located. And that within the larger canvas of liberalization. And that started giving me, giving me pieces of the picture that we were missing. And that's when I realized that if we are fragmenting our demands and our claims, we are not likely to be successful. And that's when I got to know the work of on right to the city. In the Latin American countries, it is a very advanced area of work. And then I then got more and more interested in rights of the urban poor within the right to the city. And when I was
one minute, Shruti, I just want to make sure everyone is keeping up. You said very quickly the right to the city. Can you just share a little more about what that is about?
Right. So the right to the city is, there's a lot written about around that. Henry Lefebvre has done a lot of work on right to the city. It's basically trying to look at, making claims on which are collective claims to the city itself, which are for the people who comprise the masses that live in the city. Instead of the city being disproportionately favorable to the state and capital. And so the people who make the city, literally make the city, are marginalized, often marginalized in the city. And that has always been. So cities have always had a state and capital bias. And so the right to the city was to, and there was always a, in the name of what is called planning, urban planning, that was a tool in the garb of law. It has a legal sanction in our legal systems, planning. And so planning is often done to legitimize private interests and the interests of capital and the state. And as against that, commoning the city as something that belongs to everybody who lives in it, who is part of its fabric. And so that's very loosely the right to the city. And that requires a very, very special significance in the context of the global city, which I can now define, having said all that as prefatory remarks to my work on global city. So do you want me to pause?
No. I want you to go into what is the global city. I just interjected when you said right to the city, because I wanted you to give a little more context. But yeah,
so the right to the city continues to be a challenge, and I think it is a very important rallying point. It continues to be a very important rallying point. In the meantime, urbanization itself has undergone a very huge change, and the global city is the face of that huge change in urbanization itself. So cities have been around for thousands of years now. Since there was surplus agriculture, cities came up first as mercantile trading exchange area. Basically, any non-agricultural space was an urban space. And so we saw the cities during agricultural times and industrial times and post-industrial times, during various phases of industrial, then post-industrial, and then the finance capitalism. And then we are talking of strains of capitalism which really freak me out. The surveillance capitalism is the most scary face of that, which I just heard. Sure. Thanks to the Social Dilemma movie, and I believe there's a novel. But the global city is a face of another face of capitalism, which is the global finance capitalism. Now, the word global city has been used by a sociologist in the US, Saskia Sassen, who uses it to distinguish it. So she makes a point by using, so this word has a very specific meaning. So it's not just a city which is global in nature. In the sense that, we usually think of global city as a city with very high global standards of development or lifestyle or opportunities. But a global city here is something which is which has a very distinct meaning, and I find that very useful. And so while we need to work on the entire, the entire urbanization and the forces behind it, which are of exclusionary nature, I think the global city being the stark kind of case study for me is a very useful way to look at the connection with law. So when she uses the word global city, she distinguishes it from the other kinds of cities, even the world-class city. And she basically says that the global city is not even a place, not a city. It's not even a place. It is a commodity. And she's in fact, and I'm quoting her, she calls it the global capital organizational commodity. So she's saying that it is basically when we buy into the idea of a global city, we are the consumers and the city is the commodity that we are buying into. And that so there's David Harvey, who has also done a lot of work. Again, he's not a lawyer. He's a geographer and an economist who calls it an international city. Again, it's not the world city, it's the international city. So London, Paris, New York, Tokyo, these have been the world cities. But the global city, or what Saskin calls as global city, Harvey calls as the world city, international city. So international city and global city are what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. This is something which has a special characteristic, and so this is during a time and this is very recent and ongoing phenomenon. Maybe 20 years, maybe maximum 30 years. So from early 2000s, as the entire world becomes, we are on the side of liberalization, and the global finance capitalism is growing. As Harvey has done a lot of work around how the propensity of capitalism to run into barriers and then to transcend for the accumulation of capital to keep happening. It has to keep doing innovations, and the finance capitalism as an innovation at the global geography. So we are, in 2008, the UN said that the world has become more globalized, more urbanized, more than 50% urbanized. And this is being called as the century of cities. So urbanization becomes equivalent to development. Right. Urbanization is development. Right? Mm-hmm. And so we all think that, the only way to develop is to urbanize. We don't question that. And that's not necessarily a right way to look at development. We know it leaves out human development indicators. We also know it leaves out the rural, which has its role to play, most of all for just feeding our tummies. But that's one. And then the global city particularly is enabled by the combined power and nature of both capitalism and technology, which mark our times. So because of technology, today, there is a terrific speed, mobility, and liquidity of the capital. Yeah, and
Yeah.
which neutralizes distances, which basically neutralizes.
Yes.
We can do it in a click of a button. So basically, distance is neutralized, and so what she very graphically describes the city as a node in the cyber routes and digital highways. I'm quoting her. So a node in the digital highways and cyber routes. So I actually draw it for my students, where I do a kind of very fancy, very like.
Oh
This
my
is,
God, I wish I was in your course.
and so yeah, it's just I just drew it myself, and I keep improving that diagram. But basically, then yes.
I do want to ask, because I mean, I'm hearing what you're saying. Is there a directing mind behind this organizing of the city as a commodity, whether it's a series of institutions, whether it's stakeholders, whether it's corporates, or is it that this is something that has organically developed because of capital and technology and the intersection, globalization? What do you think are the drivers of this phenomenon, this global city phenomenon?
Right. So it could be, that's a very good question. It could look, so cities by their very nature inherently have grown organically. And in that sense, this could look organic. It could, and that is actually a trap we walk into when we think of this as organic. That
Right.
could have happened, that's in the way the cities are growing, our cities would have become, which is why it is important to look at the global city as not as a city, which was organically transforming itself as needs changed, but as something that is not a city or place, but a commodity. And so here, for the first time, and I was shocked, Margaret, I was attending a conference about 10 years back, where the then urban affairs minister of India said that he was very proudly making a declaration. He said that what we are doing now in India is supply-driven urbanization. He said we are not doing demand-driven urbanization. And urbanization was always about people. People made cities. People transformed cities. It was about people. And the capitalists were part of that people, right? So, but here, the city ceases to be a bottom-up enterprise of people about their lives. And it becomes a top-down enterprise of the state at the behest of the capital.
Wow.
So here you see how perniciously the capital starts declaring a certain form that suits them to overcome the barrier that they had run into in these past 20, 30 years. And so the capitalists then arrive at an idea of a city which is characterized by two parallelly two trends. There is high concentration, integration, as well as dispersal of economic activities, enabled by the fact that the capital is fluid and highly mobile because of technology. And so the economic activities can be dispersed. Even the core complex functions can be outsourced. So the city becomes, the global city is then, as I said, a node. So the corporation sitting in New York could have a node of that corporation in a city, which could be either carrying out the economic activities of production or service, or it could be performing the complex outsourced activity of management nature. The financial management or technology support. So you will typically have, I know companies that have technology support from India 24 hours, because India has a huge, we have Silicon Valleys here. So then in that case, a global city is not that big old city, that has just mutated. It's a global city could be a greenfield city, a small, tiny greenfield city. And I came across these I initially thought it was science fiction, the city like Songdo in South Korea, or Masdar in Middle East, or in India, we have many of these. These are greenfield cities. They are acquired lands, which is acquired agricultural lands, then become very. The logic of these cities is to serve a multinational, transnational corporation mostly in the global north, with that kind of power of capital, to be able to get entire cities to be set up to their needs. And so then the cities, the global city could be a very tiny city like the Songdo, which has about 40,000 or 50,000. They are highly, highly expensive in terms of not just monies, but in terms of their carbon footprints. And so they are the cities that are about technology, about efficiency, about wealth generation, about serving the needs of the transnational corporation. And so the constituency of these cities is highly specialized, highly professionalized, highly tech savvy, highly highly creative. These are the creative classes, and so they kind of take over the city. Wow. And so these global cities, you will have no space for the poor. So while the cities always had, the poor were marginalized, here the city completely, the imagination of the city has no place for the earth. So the non-experts, the non-hyper specialized, the non-hyper professional, the people who actually undergird the city by ordinary non-expert activities like cleaning, like trade, retail trade, like shopkeeping, like our, support
running the trains and cleaning, which we saw in COVID. Right. These are the people that that are the most important people to our, well-being. I do want to just jump in and ask a question. This is fascinating stuff. Even what you were just saying about these cities that are set up, they acquired lands and serving the needs of a transnational interest. It reminds me of how in the Caribbean colonies were set up, where the whole purpose of the colony was to serve the needs of an external entity, a foreign entity. And in circumstances like that, the focus is not the development of where we are, where we start. I want to ask you, because you did point to cities in the global south. Is there any difference in how the global city phenomenon operates in the global north and the global south?
Yes, so you have got it, Margaret. And I was wondering if I was struggling, to explain this. So if you understand, if you can see if there is a resonance from the imperialist, times, this is a new phase of imperialism. The only thing I would say before I go into the global north-south, and that's a very, very important difference to make and understand for our purposes, the fact that in that imperialist phase, the driver was the state. Yes, for the capital, but the state. So which is why the earlier cities were the world cities. The nation state was still the driver.
Right.
And yes, of course, the corporate, there was a nexus, but the driver was still the nation state. The global city, and that's the last thing that I want to say before I go into the north-south divide. The global city, as Saskia Sassen describes, and as David Harvey and others now, is a city that makes the nation state almost redundant.
Wow.
The nations, because it is place neutral. Remember, Margaret, it is place neutral. It is distant neutral. It is all. It's a zone on the cyber
and driven by capital and corporations.
Right. And also, you don't need the government to mediate you. So you can transfer money and you can get people to support your work across. So you transcend national boundaries. So this is globalization. This is globalization, urbanization, globalization, and the urban and the global finance capitalism coming together. So the city is a subnational, but transnational, supranational space, and the government becomes less and less involved, less and less willing to perform its responsibilities as the leveler. And that is why the cities, so we are living in highly unequal times today, the kind of inequality we are witnessing, and the city is then a very important part of that inequality, because the state goes missing. the government is missing in action. Everything is taken over. This is the face of the unbridled capitalism,
Right.
where the state is so shrunken. And actually, the only role that you see the state playing is to advance the interests of the corporations. So whatever suits the corporations, and so the government is playing less and less role.
Right.
And coming to the global South city. So,
Yeah.
and this is very important. So, there is a difference between the global South and the global North, because the global South has typically been a late arrival in the modern wave of urbanization. So it is not true that the urbanization started from North, because if you look at the map of urbanization from the thousands of years, the earliest cities civilizationally on Earth were not in global North. They came late. But in the modern phase of capitalism, the cities, the global North cities are first arrivals, and the global South is a late arrival, especially Africa and Asia. So our cities have a different nature to them, and thank God, because we are still growing organically. And that is because while the state shrunk itself, the cities marched on, organically. And so people kind of still had a hold in the global South. And so you see the global South cities having pervasive informality, because the state is missing in action. The state is not there. The state does not care. And so in the global city imagination by the corporations, where they don't care for the non-expert the people who are non-experts, they further informalize those who don't belong to the grid. Those who fall out of the grid are further marginalized as informal people. So they are further informalized. And our cities were always more informal. The informality was always more pervasive in global South cities, which is why. So a very easy way of understanding the difference between the global city of the global North and the global city of the global South is I say this, and I hope I'm not. I mean, it could sound offensive.
We have to say it, Shruti. We have to say it. Let's say it.
I say that the global South city is the global South city, which is often called a mega city.
Right.
Which is a metonym for developmentalism, as Ananya Roy, she's an Indian-born urbanist in the US now. She calls it the mega city, which is a metonym, she says. And the slum is a further metonym of it. And they are seen as apocalyptic, dystopian, places. So I call, and they often say this to basically make us, and that is why I call it a global city dream. We all living in these mega cities of global South, we imagine our mega cities becoming global cities. And so all of us aspire to become global cities. And so a global city of the global South is a wannabe global North city. Global North global city. It's a wannabe global city. We want to become like Tokyo, and we say it openly in India, in Indian policies. We say we'll make a Shanghai out of your city. We'll make a Tokyo out of your city. We'll make a London out of your city. That's the promise the government is selling to us. That's the rhetoric. We all want to become London, Tokyo, New York, Shanghai, and Singapore. And we get experts from these countries as consultants to come and advise us on how to set our cities right. So basically our global cities, which is the global cities of global South, are cities that are waiting. It's called a failed city. It's called a city in waiting. It's also the Slumdog City. Remember the one, that movie that went on to get Oscars? The Slumdog City. So it is a city that has that's chaotic, filthy, polluted, overcrowded, large, dangerous. Smog is kind of its defining feature. All these Chinese cities and the Indian cities and all over. And Ananya Roy talks about this as she calls it the poverty pornography, where, you know, we go up as outsiders and visit the slums,
Yeah.
and we say, oh my God, you know, look at these people, but they still manage to live. So some of us who are more sensitized, we say, oh wow, look at their resilience, look at their inventiveness, look at their entrepreneurial spirit. And some of of us are, of course, totally horrified, and we just find it unbearable, and we just run away. But some of us go, you know, with those touristy eyes, and we look at them as inspiration, and we go gaga over them. But there is a difference there. So this is in terms of what is the difference in global city of global north and global city of global south, is the developmental lag, which makes our global south cities as the mega cities that are waiting for the global north cities to rescue them, to make, you know, to set us right. And basically the difference is the difference of planning. And that planning is a very important idea here, because that planning is what connects, you know, the planning masquerades as legality. So what is planned is legal, and what is planned is formal. So what is formal is what is legal. What is not formal, what is informal is not legal. So informal is illegal, formal only is legal, which means that all our slums or settlements are informal and hence illegal.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
they need to be corrected.
Right. And Shruti, I mean, I'm looking at the time, and so I really do want us to get straight into how is this relevant for lawyers? I mean, it is clear that lawyers are not placing a focus on this. We seem to be just the transactional experts underlying the commoditization of the city. And we just, you know, we create these agreements, we advise these corporations, and so we're part of the infrastructure without having this understanding. How is this relevant to lawyers? What should lawyers be thinking about, and what should we be doing going forward? Because I see we just have about 10 more minutes or so.
Okay. So
Yeah.
I'll go very quickly. I'm sorry if I was long winding. And
Oh,
so, so very quickly, first of all, we need to establish the connection with law. The fact that this is legally produced, managed and maintained. You know, this city which is inherently a space that will exacerbate inequality, which will marginalize most of the masses, which run the city, which make the city, and which will appropriate the city in fewer and fewer hands of the super wealthy. So this is not even the wealthy and poor. It is actually the super wealthy and the non-super wealthy, including the upper middle classes and the poor, of course. So it involves all of us. And we need to understand that this is not organic. This is about a very drastic change in the way the state plays its roles and performs its obligations, the core minimum obligations, the state as a leveler of our socioeconomic and political relationships, and the fact that the city, that state intervention which has gone away in this transnational understanding of urbanization, that has to be restored. And as lawyers, people working with law and policy, we need to bring that back into the conversation. We need to understand things like planned illegality, what Gautam Bhan in Indian Urbanist calls as planned illegality. So this whole collapsing of formality with legality and informality with illegality, which results into planning as a tool for illegalizing vast masses of the city and then throwing them out, or peripheralizing them, you know, putting them on the margins, both literally and figuratively. This kind of inequality, this understanding of informality as the gray space, which is very carefully and deliberately maintained by the state at the behest of the corporations to suit. It's a spatial differential that suits a purpose. It allows the state to use its police powers to illegalize some people who are in the informal space, and to legalize some people who are not who are in the informal space but which suit the government, including so most of the the powers of the super rich are also in the informal space, but that is considered legal because the state exercise. Also this fragmentation, and I talked about the fact that we look at housing rights without looking at the city, without looking at the larger, trends of capitalism and the states shrinking, the privatization, deregulation, globalization's ugly face, which is about globalizing, selective globalization. All of that we have to call out. We have to call out the myth of the twin rhetoric of city as, offering better life and better prosperity and economic opportunities. And I think that so instead of looking at just the technical urban laws, we need to look at the larger politics of laws, which allows this kind of inequality to happen through urbanization, which we are told is inevitable and which will really be good for all of us. And we need to call that out. We need to understand the power, the political agency and the power that the poor are still exercising. And that's why the global South cities are very important, because the global South cities actually show us, because fortunately we have more informality. We see that informality is actually a solution towards making our cities more sustainable, more resilient, more collectivized, more amenable to the right to the city idea, where city is seen more as a commons than as a private enterprise. And so as lawyers, instead of just applying the laws technically and mindlessly, we need to first of all move outside our disciplinary boundaries.
So critical.
Go and understand the other disciplines. Go and understand from sociologists, economists, geographers, urbanists about what is happening. Engage with the globalization's larger trend. Understand capitalism. And also last word, Margaret, that I think that this is, we are now at a time when it's a time of reckoning. And I think that as lawyers, we need to understand that law has been a structure of inequality, because it has it has consistently protected private property. Yeah, apart from the patriarchy and the feudalism and the gender and the religion and all that those are the structures, the status quo. Law has been always conservative because it has protected private property. And I think today, with the ugly faces of capitalism that we are witnessing through this kind of urbanization or the surveillance capitalism, or other forms, many other forms that we see, just the war, the heavy militarization, stuff like that, we need to see how we change. As lawyers, we challenge this paradigm of capitalism, this paradigm of justice, and we look at our roles in that more complex, more messy space, and try to reimagine development which is not based which is not based on private property, but perhaps this is the time when we are being forced to look at egalitarian ideas of property itself. And that ties very well with the idea of global city as a commodity and as a property. So yes, I think that as lawyers, we need to be making more what John Lewis said, necessary trouble and good trouble. So that's why I call myself a wandering lawyer, trying to make more trouble. We need to really question everything. We need to bust myths.
And Shruti, you see what you've shared here this morning, and this is why we try to give you the space of 45 minutes, I think is one of the critical levers and areas that I think is going under the radar of lawyers, which is really important for us to put a focus on wherever we are in the world. How is this phenomenon impacting in our area? And we really need to get you out of your information and your mapping of this issue. We'd really love to bring you in closer to do that for even broader audience than your course in India in the Jindal Law School, because I think lawyers all around the world would need this kind of program, because I can continue talking to you for several hours, because one of the issues I would like us to explore would be what are the policies that are being used as entry points to facilitate the growing of this global city phenomenon, because, you know, looking at it from other areas of the law, what is done is that gaps in the law are exploited or tweaks in the law are made. This planned illegality is one that you've pointed out today, but there are many other areas, and the policies dealing with foreign investment, policies dealing with opening up trade, policies dealing with, you know, how corporates have rights within jurisdictions. I mean, there's a whole network, a whole complex system of policies that I think we need to develop some programming around to help lawyers all over the world start to recognize this phenomenon in their city. So, I mean, I'm really grateful for this conversation. And it's clear to me that we need to develop this kind of programming so that lawyers can become more effective in creating more equitable and inclusive urban spaces. So, Shruti, thank you for this opportunity. I'm sorry we haven't been able to take many questions. We're on a very tight schedule today, but I do want to point out that Alexar, are you still here? Alexar has been really contributing during this conversation. And I would love if, Alexar, would you like to come in and share your comments and or questions to Professor Shruti Pandey? Maybe Alexar, you know, you're on mute if you're not. But basically, Alexar is, you know, he recognizes the phenomenon, and he, oh, his mic, the mic is off. Hi, Alexar, are you speaking?
Yeah, you saying something about Alexar.
Right, I saw his mic came off, so I thought he was going to jump in. So he was saying, I heard once most of the population of the world live in 300
okay. I thought you were telling me about Alexar. So I thought while he's setting up his mic, you could tell me a bit about him.
I don't know very much about Alexar. So he's trying to come in on another device now. Maybe, yeah, his thing wasn't working properly before.
Up his mic. I want to make in the meantime a very important point that I missed, Margaret, which will kind of as a closing remark, that as lawyers in the global space, as global, you know, and which is why I was interested in to begin with in this conversation that we are having as a global community, that I think that this global city cannot be addressed by us sitting within our national boundaries. That we have to work. So what has been called as the rescaling of strategic territories. It requires us to rescale our strategic territories. So while there is a very strong local in the global city, because the marginalization is most visibly experienced at the local level, but because there are ramifications outside the national, beyond the local, we need to have strategic territories that are nimble across the local, national, transnational, supranational, and for that we need to be, you know, working as a global community of lawyers.
Love that, and that's why you're with us, Alexa. We just want you. We'd love to bring you into the conversation just quickly, Alexa, before we tie up.
Good morning.
If you could just, you know, give your name, where you're coming in from, and your comments on what Professor Shruti has been sharing on.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity. I really enjoyed the conversation, very inspiring. For the interest of time, I probably won't talk much. Just briefly, I'm in Australia. I'm a technologist and a social entrepreneur. And I was an electrical engineer and now more into tech. And I got into smart cities. And then a few ideas that was brought up today was very interesting for me, especially about common goods and commons and the governance in the local level, and a few other things that Shruti, you mentioned. So hopefully in a different time, yeah, we can go more into the concepts and I can learn more about what you're doing and see how I can contribute.
You are a very important stakeholder, Alexa. You are a very important stakeholder in this. You have enabled the global cities. It's because of it's because of technology that the global cities have happened in the first place. So,
I'm
and
so
it's
glad.
yes, it's
I'm so
important to
glad someone from low background is in these conversations, because unfortunately, especially past 2 decades, everything is being very rushed by technologies, and and they normally come from younger ages, without much life experience or understanding of history and the reasons for things, and always low tries to catch up in the best case. In the worst case, they can't even do that. So it's really good for law community to be involved in the cutting edge, so we can actually shape things in the right way at the first place.
Likewise, I think it's very interesting that, you from your technology background, you are finding this of interest, because I think that's where our future is. We need to work across our disciplines, and all of us need to work with a socially conscientious, approach within our disciplines and across our disciplines. So, so yes, likewise, I think it is very interesting that a person from your kind of background is, following this conversation. Thank you
Yeah,
for
because, and that's how we curated this space. We made it really clear. This is an
Thank you,
interdisciplinary
Margaret.
dialogue, interdisciplinary. Anya, my partner, I know we just have a transition launch after, so I think we can go on a couple more minutes, but Anya, my partner, sometimes says, Margaret, I think we're in a sort of new Renaissance period. That's what we're in. Remember during the first Renaissance, it was like
Love
a
that.
converging of many disciplines. People were philosophers and spiritual people and mathematicians and scientists all at the same time. And
Right.
what happened with industrialization is we all became, and it was good for a time, deeply specialized in all our respective specializations. And we went deep, 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 deep. And now everyone is working in silos, and things
Right.
are, all the connections are being made and sprouting exponentially. And now there is a real need for the coming together again. It's like a cycle. We need to figure this out together. Lawyers need to come together with technologists, need to come together with social scientists, need to come together with urban planners. And so this is, to us, key. The interdisciplinary space is what we're, and transnational space that you are talking about is what we are trying to bring together. So it's exciting to have Alexar in this conversation and just put in his little piece as a technologist, seeing, the gap. Why are lawyers not here? And lawyers like yourself with the experience and the background and understanding of the historical context coming in to say, listen, this seems to be repeating something that had certain consequences in the past in an exponential way, in an even scarier way. So yeah, this has been a really exciting conversation, Shruti, and we are excited at Future Law about our continued collaboration to build this kind of programming. And I think that we would love to establish a network community of practice. And Alexa, we invite you to be a part of that around the global city itself, as an issue. So looking at the time, Shruti, I will give you even a couple more minutes for your final last words. We will close with you. For those who are just joining us, I'm so sorry you missed this incredible conversation, right? I'm so sorry, but the replays will be up. Yeah, Rob? Yeah. So final comments from you, Professor Shruti Pandey.
No, I think you've summed it very well. I think we need catalysts like you to do this, making the connections that are going to really give us a bigger picture and the more effective solutions, because the problems are not in silos. So I call it, a lawyering plus approach. I say that we need to be very good lawyers, and Alexa, you need to be very good, engineers, and then all of us who know our own disciplines very well, we have very sound understanding of our disciplines. Only then you can then go and reach out to the other disciplines and understand their perspectives. So it requires us to be both deep into our own disciplines, believe that I cannot work with law unless I believe that law is a critical tool for justice, and then reach out to play my role in the bigger picture of global city and urbanization and capitalism and the kind of inequality that we are facing today of its own kind. So but thank you so much for Future Law Institute to do this, and I'm really I'm looking to this as a beginning.
So are we. Thank you very much, Professor Pandey.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.